The year was 1914. The autumn air hung cold and still over the Appalachian Mountains, carrying with it the scent of pine and the promise of early snow. Silas Brennan sat on the porch of his cabin, his weathered hands working a piece of mountain oak with slow, deliberate strokes. At 75 years old, his fingers still knew the wood, knew how to coax beauty from rough grain. The knife moved with practiced certainty, each curl of shaving falling away like years peeling back from memory. He heard her before he saw her, the sound of a horse picking its way up the narrow mountain trail, hooves finding purchase on loose stone. Silas did not look up from his work. Visitors were rare this high in the mountains, but he had learned long ago not to show surprise. Surprise was weakness, and weakness got men killed. The rider came into view as the trail opened into the clearing before his cabin. A young woman, perhaps 25, sitting straight-backed in the saddle despite the difficult climb. She wore a traveling coat against the October chill, and her dark hair was pinned up beneath a simple hat. When she dismounted, her movements spoke of city breeding, of a life lived far from these mountains. "Grandfather," she said. Silas set down his knife and looked at her properly for the first time in 5 years. Emma Brennan, his granddaughter, Sarah's daughter's child, the last living connection to a woman he had loved and lost a lifetime ago. "Emma," he said simply. His voice was still strong, still carried the weight of mountains and years. "Been a while." She tied her horse to the post he kept for that purpose, though it saw little use. When she turned back to face him, he saw tears in her eyes. Not tears of sadness, something else. Determination, perhaps. Or the kind of tears that came when a person finally found the courage to ask a question they had been carrying too long. "I need to know about Grandmother Sarah," she said. "About Grace Thornton. About what really happened in 1889. Silas studied his granddaughter's face. She had Sarah's eyes, gray-green like mountain storms. The resemblance was enough to make his chest tighten with old grief. "Why now?" he asked. Emma stepped closer, her hands clasped in front of her. "Because I am working with the women's suffrage movement in Charleston. We are organizing, trying to get the vote. And they need stories, real stories. About men who stood up, about women who survived, about justice." Silas nodded slowly. He had heard of the suffrage movement, of course. Women marching in cities, demanding their voices be heard. It seemed right to him. Women like Sarah, like Grace, like the Ruth Palmers of the world, deserved to be heard. They had earned it with blood and courage. "You want me to talk about old times," he said. "I want you to tell me the truth," Emma replied. "Not the sanitized version, not the story for polite company. I want to know what really happened when you saved Grace Thornton, and why it mattered." Silas was quiet for a long moment. The wind moved through the pines, making them whisper secrets to each other. A hawk called somewhere high above its cry, lonely and fierce. Finally, he gestured to the chair beside him. "Sit," he said. "If I am going to tell this, you need to hear all of it." Emma sat folding her hands in her lap, waiting. Silas picked up his knife again, not to carve, but because having something in his hands made the telling easier. "There is something you must promise first," he said, his voice taking on a quality that Emma had never heard before. Harder, older. "You have to hear the whole story, all of it. The parts I am proud of, and the parts that haunt me. The moments of courage, and the moments I failed. You understand?" Emma nodded. "I promise." "Good." Silas looked out at the mountains, at the endless rolling peaks that had been his home for more than half a century. "Then I will tell you about the summer of 1889. When I was 50 years old, when I had been alone for 3 years, and when I found a woman tied to a tree in the forest, put there by a man who thought himself above God's law. The old man closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they held the distant look of someone no longer seeing the present, but the past. It started with blood on the leaves, he said, and it ended with more blood on the courthouse steps. But between those two moments, something changed in me, in all of us. We learned that ordinary men could stand against power, that silence was consent, that doing nothing was the worst sin of all. Emma leaned forward, drawn into the gravity of her grandfather's words. "The year was 1889, Silas began, and I was a ghost." The memory rose like morning mist, obscuring the present, revealing the past. 25 years earlier, August 1889. Silas Brennan moved through the pre-dawn forest like smoke, his boots finding silent purchase on the carpet of pine needles and moss. At 50, his body still carried the strength of younger years, shoulders broad from splitting wood and hauling water, arms corded with muscle that came not from vanity but from survival. His hair, long and tied back with a strip of leather, had begun its slow surrender to gray. The beard that covered his jaw was shot through with silver, and a scar ran down his left cheek, a memento from a Confederate saber at Antietam. He was tracking deer. The buck had passed through perhaps an hour before dawn, moving east toward the creek where the animals came to drink. Silas read the story in the earth the way other men read newspapers. The depth of the hoof prints told him weight. 180 pounds, maybe more. The spacing told him gait. Walking, not running. Not spooked. The moisture in the tracks told him time. Recent. Fresh enough that the morning dew had not yet settled into the impressions. He moved upwind, rifle slung across his back, every sense tuned to the forest around him. This was meditation for him, this silent stalking through the wilderness where the only sounds were the whisper of wind through leaves and the distant call of morning birds. In these moments, he could almost forget, almost silence the memories of Sarah's voice, her laughter, the way she had looked at him across the dinner table with love in her eyes. 3 years since she died. 3 years since he had buried her and their unborn child beneath the big oak behind the cabin. 3 years of silence. The deer track led him east, then north, following the natural contours of the land. Silas had hunted these mountains since the war ended, had made them his sanctuary and his prison. He knew every ridge, every hollow, every stream. He could walk from his cabin to Hollow Creek Town in darkness and never lose his way. He was studying a particularly clear hoof print when he heard it, a sound that did not belong in the forest. Human. Female. Crying. Silas froze his hand, moving instinctively to the rifle. Bears did not cry. Mountain lions did not sob. Only people made that sound, and people in these mountains usually meant trouble of the worst kind. He stood slowly listening. The sound came again, clearer now. A woman's voice, weak with exhaustion and terror, coming from the northeast, perhaps 100 yards distant in the direction of the Blackwood Ranch. Silas moved toward the sound, his approach careful and silent. Years of war had taught him how to become invisible, how to move through terrain without disturbing it. He used cover-keeping trees between himself and the source of the crying, advancing in short movements, always watching. The forest opened into a small clearing where a massive oak had fallen years before, its roots torn up from the earth like the fingers of some buried giant clawing toward the sky. And there, tied to that fallen tree, was a woman. Silas stopped 20 yards distant, taking in the scene with the tactical assessment of a soldier. The woman was young, maybe 27 or 28. She wore what had once been the gray habit of a Catholic nun, though it was now torn and filthy, stained with dirt and what might have been blood. Her hair, brown and cut short in the style of the sisters, was matted with sweat. But it was her belly that stopped Silas cold. She was pregnant. Very pregnant. 7 months, perhaps more. Someone had tied her to that tree with new rope, the kind you bought from a lumber yard. Yellow hemp, still showing its fresh fibers. The rope was wound around her wrists and waist, pulled tight against the rough bark. Her hands were swollen, the circulation cut off. Her face was bruised, one eye nearly swollen shut. She had not been hidden. She had been placed here, put on display. Silas could see the Blackwood Ranch through the trees, maybe 100 yards distant, close enough that she could probably hear the windmill creaking on its axis, close enough that whoever had done this wanted her found. Eventually. He took off his wide-brimmed hat so she could see his face clearly. The morning sun caught the scar on his cheek as he stepped into the clearing. He moved slowly, deliberately, giving her time to see he was not a threat. He set his hat on a nearby stump and placed his canteen on the ground, not pushing it toward her, just leaving it where she could see it. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was rough from disuse. He had spoken to no one in weeks. "I am going to cut you loose." Her eyes, red from crying, flickered toward him and then past him toward the ranch house visible through the trees. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, cracked and dry. "Don't. Please don't." Silas stopped. He had expected her to beg him to help. He had expected relief, maybe tears of joy. He had not expected her to tell him to stop. "I cannot leave you here," he said quietly. "Whatever happens after, you cannot stay like this." "You will die," she whispered. The words came out with terrible certainty. "If you help me, you will die." Silas had lived with death as his only companion for 3 years now. The idea of dying did not frighten him much anymore. But the idea of walking away, of leaving this woman tied to a tree like an animal, of doing nothing while someone suffered when he had the power to help, that terrified him in a way bullets never had. He knelt beside the fallen oak, his knees pressing into the rough bark, and pulled out his knife. The woman's breath caught in her throat. "I am just cutting the rope," he said quietly. "Be still." He worked the blade under the rope, sawing slowly so it would not snap back and hurt her. The fibers were tough, new and strong, and he had to put real effort into it. Whoever had tied her had not wanted her getting loose on her own. As he cut, he noticed something that made his jaw tighten. Boot prints circled the tree, deep at the heels, back and forth like someone had waited, watched, made sure their message was clear. The prints were fresh, made within the last day. And they were distinctive. The left boot had a chunk missing from the heel, leaving an unusual pattern in the soft earth. When the rope finally gave, her arms dropped heavily like she had forgotten how to move them. She gasped and curled inward, one hand going immediately to her swollen belly. Silas leaned back, keeping his hands where she could see them, giving her space. He did not touch her. He waited. After a long moment, she looked at him properly for the first time. Her eyes were the color of winter stone gray and hard with pain. But beneath the pain, he saw something else. Determination, strength that had not been broken despite everything that had been done to her. "What is your name?" he asked. She swallowed, her throat working against the dryness. "Magdalene. But people call me Grace." He nodded once. "I am Silas." Grace did not answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on the distant ranch house, as if expecting someone to come running out at any moment. Silas took off his leather coat and laid it across the oak trunk near her, close enough that she could reach it if she wanted. She hesitated, then pulled it around her shoulders. That small gesture mattered more than she probably knew. It meant she was choosing to accept help, choosing to trust, even if only a little. "Can you stand?" he asked. She tried. Her legs shook violently, muscles that had been held in one position too long refusing to obey. She made it halfway up before her knees buckled, and she fell back against the tree, tears streaming down her face. Silas did not try to lift her. Instead, he walked back through the trees to where he had left his horse, a steady bay mare named Rain. He brought the horse around and helped Grace onto it, turning his back while she settled herself, giving her what dignity he could. When he turned around again, she was holding the saddle horn with white-knuckled hands, her whole body trembling. As Silas tied his rope to the saddle, preparing to lead Rain back toward his cabin, his fingers brushed against the cut length still lying on the ground. That rope stayed in his mind like a splinter you could not quite dig out. Someone had gone to the store and paid for it. Someone had planned this. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of hay and horses from the Blackwood place. "He is my husband," Grace said suddenly, her voice flat and hollow. "Or he says he is." Silas looked at her, waited. "Deacon Douglas Blackwood," she went on. "He said the baby was not his. He said people needed to see. He said it would end the talk." Silas felt something cold settle in his chest. This had not been an accident. This had been a lesson, a warning, a demonstration of power. He climbed up onto the horse in front of Grace, keeping space between them, and took the reins. The ranch behind them stayed silent, too silent. He glanced once more at the fallen tree, at the rope still lying there like a snake someone might come back for. If her husband had wanted her found, Silas wondered what he was planning to do once people started asking questions. The horse did not pick up speed until the Blackwood Ranch fell out of sight behind the ridge. Even then, Silas kept the pace easy, letting Rain walk steady, the kind of pace you set when you did not want to draw attention. Grace sat behind him, turned slightly to one side to accommodate her belly, one hand still pressed against it like she was holding something precious in place. They passed a dry wash, then a stretch of fence with posts leaning every which way. The kind of fence nobody fixed because everybody knew whose land it was. Blackwood land. Silas did not like how close it all felt, how far the deacon's reach extended into these hills. Halfway to his cabin, Silas stopped Rain and dismounted. He walked back along their trail for 20 yards, studying the ground. What he saw made his blood run cold. Fresh boot prints. Not his, not Grace's. Someone had been here within the last hour, maybe less, following them. He walked further back, reading the sign. The tracker had stopped when Silas stopped, had waited when Silas had helped Grace onto the horse. The prints showed a man of considerable size wearing boots that left deep impressions. And there, clear as day, was that same distinctive notch in the left heel. Silas returned to Rain and swung back into the saddle without saying anything to Grace. But his hand moved to rest on the rifle butt, and his eyes never stopped scanning the tree line. 10 minutes later, he saw it. Hanging from a low branch across the trail, coiled perfectly like it had been placed there by a careful hand, was another length of rope. Brand new. Same yellow hemp as the rope that had bound Grace. Silas stopped Rain. The message was clear. "We are watching. We can reach you any time we want." He dismounted again and lifted the rope down. The hemp was rough against his palm, still smelling of the store where it had been purchased. He examined the tree where it had hung. No boot prints here. Whoever had placed it had approached from the rocky ground where tracks would not show. "What does it mean?" Grace asked, her voice small. "It means they know where I am taking you," Silas said. "And they want me to know they know." He coiled the rope and tied it to his saddle. Evidence, though evidence of what exactly he was not yet sure. They reached his cabin just as the sun started to drop enough to take the edge off the August heat. His place was not much to look at. A low structure built from logs he had cut and hewn himself, with a stone chimney that leaked smoke when the wind came from the north. The barn leaned slightly, but held. The corral was patched more times than he could count. It was not welcoming, but it was quiet. It was safe, or it had been until now. Silas helped Grace down from the horse without lifting her, just steadying her elbow until her feet found solid ground. She swayed, and he guided her to the porch rail where she could support herself. "Wait here," he said. He went inside first, rifle in hand, checking the single room with quick efficiency. Nothing disturbed, no one waiting. He had learned in the war never to assume safety. When he emerged, Grace was still standing where he had left her, one hand on the rail, the other on her belly. Her face was pale, lips cracked and bleeding from dehydration. She looked like she might collapse at any moment. "Come," he said. Inside the cabin was sparse but clean. A rough wooden table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in one corner, shelves lined with books, perhaps 50 of them, their spines worn from reading. Sarah's books. She had brought them from Baltimore when they married, and Silas had never been able to part with them. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and beside it a cabinet that held his medicine supplies. Herbs mostly, things Sarah had taught him to use. He pulled out a chair by the table and poured water into a tin cup from the bucket he kept covered. Grace drank it down in 3 long swallows, then stopped breathing hard. "Slowly," Silas said. "Too fast and you will be sick." She nodded, accepting the cup when he refilled it. This time she sipped. "You are safe here for tonight," Silas said. "For tonight. For tonight," she repeated, as if the idea of tomorrow was too much to consider. He nodded. "Night is all I am offering right now." That seemed to settle her a little, but underneath her exhaustion, Silas could sense something else. Fear, yes, but also the kind of tension that came from waiting for the other shoe to drop. Grace spoke while Silas was washing his hands in the basin. He said it would be cleaner this way. Silas did not turn around. He let her talk. He said if people saw me like that, tied up and helpless, they would understand. Understand what? Silas asked quietly. That I was a problem, she said. That I needed to be dealt with. That even a woman of God could fall so far that she deserved whatever came next. Silas dried his hands slowly on a rag. He turned to look at her. She was not crying. She looked tired in a way that went deeper than physical exhaustion. It was the kind of tired that came from being argued with for too long, from having your reality questioned and twisted until you could not trust your own memory anymore. "Did he tie you himself?" Silas asked. Grace hesitated, then nodded. "He did not rush," she added, her voice barely above a whisper. "That is what scared me most. He was calm, like he was tying up a horse, like I was just another piece of property that needed to be secured." Silas felt that rope again, like it was tightening somewhere behind his ribs. Outside, a tin can rattled against the fence. Just once. Silas froze. The sound came again, faint, like a boot had brushed against it by accident. He moved to the window without hurrying, his hand resting on the sill. Nothing there. Just the yard. The fence, the narrow road beyond that led down the mountain. But when he stepped onto the porch, he saw them. Fresh boot prints in the dirt near the gate. Heavy at the heel. Prints that had not been there that morning. He did not follow them. Instead, he went back inside and latched the door. Not slamming it, not making a show, just securing it the way a man does when he knows someone has been watching. "Someone out there," Grace whispered. "Maybe," Silas said. "Maybe not." It was not comforting, but it was honest. He set his rifle by the door, not leaning it dramatically against the wall, just resting it where it belonged, where he could reach it in the dark if needed. They ate in silence. Cold venison and the rest of the cornbread he had baked 2 days before. Silas laid out a blanket near the small bed in the corner and took the chair by the wall for himself. He did not explain, did not make a speech about propriety or protection. He just stayed. Grace lay down fully clothed, the blanket pulled up to her chin. Within minutes her breathing deepened into the rhythm of sleep. Exhaustion had finally claimed her. Silas sat in the darkness, rifle across his knees, and watched the window. Sometime after midnight the sound came again, closer this time. A footstep, careful, measured. Then the faint scrape of something against wood. Silas stood slowly, moving to the window without making the floorboards creak. In the moonlight he could see it clearly. A length of rope hung over the fence post near the corral, looped once, then twice, like someone testing weight, like someone leaving a message. He went outside, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. No one was in sight. The rope swayed slightly in the night breeze. Silas lifted it down, feeling the fibers rough against his palm. Same rope, same message. Whoever had done this wanted him to see, wanted him to know they could reach him any time they wanted. He cut the rope down and laid it flat on the ground in case he needed it for evidence later. When he turned back toward the cabin, Grace was watching him through the window, her face pale in the lamplight. "They know where you live now," she said when he came back inside. Silas nodded. "Yes." "And they know you saw," she added. "Yes." She swallowed hard. "What happens in the morning?" Silas looked out toward the road that led down to Hollow Creek, pale and winding in the moonlight, like a scar across the mountain's face. "In the morning," he said slowly, "we stop hiding." He did not say the rest, did not say that if Blackwood was already writing the story out here in the dark, what kind of ending was the deacon planning when daylight came. But they both knew the game had started the moment Silas cut that rope. And men like Douglas Blackwood did not play games they did not intend to win. Morning came hot and clear, like the sky had no idea what had happened in the night. Silas was up before the sun cleared the low eastern hills. His coffee sat barely touched his eyes on the road that snaked down toward Hollow Creek. Grace sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of water, watching him with the careful attention of someone trying to anticipate danger before it arrived. "We are going to town," Silas said, not looking at her. She stiffened. He could see it in the way her shoulders pulled back, the way her breathing changed. "To the doctor," he continued, "and to put ourselves where people can see us. If Blackwood wants a fight, he can have it in daylight, with witnesses." Grace nodded slowly, though her hands trembled slightly against the cup. The wagon rolled out with the sun just climbing, dust puffing up behind them in soft bursts. Neither of them looked back toward where Blackwood's land stretched out like a kingdom, but both felt it there, a weight pressing down on their shoulders. They reached the edge of Hollow Creek before the town fully woke. Silas pulled the wagon up near the livery stable and helped Grace down, his movements steady and careful. She moved like someone who had been hurt in ways that did not show. The livery stable smelled of hay and horse sweat and leather. Silas had been coming here for years, knew every board and beam. As he was tying off the wagon, a voice called out from the darkness inside, "Mr. Brennan." A boy emerged from the shadows, thin and dirty, carrying a pitchfork twice his size. Ezra Pike, 14 years old, all knees and elbows, with blonde hair that stuck up in odd directions no matter what he did to it. "Ezra," Silas said. The boy's face lit up like Silas had given him a gift just by saying his name. They had an arrangement of sorts. Silas had been teaching the boy tracking and hunting for the past 6 months, ever since Ezra's father had died in an accident at the Blackwood lumber mill. The boy had nowhere else to go, no one else to teach him the skills he would need to survive in these mountains. "I got something for you," Ezra said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Important." Silas gestured for Grace to wait by the wagon. He followed Ezra to the back corner of the stable, where the boy had made himself a small living space among the hay bales. "What is it?" Silas asked. Ezra pulled out a scrap of paper from his pocket, the writing crooked and uncertain like it had been done in a hurry. "I seen something yesterday, at the lumber yard." Silas took the paper. Just 3 words in pencil. "Blackwood bought rope." "You saw him buy it?" Silas asked. Ezra nodded vigorously. 3 days ago, 50 feet of hemp rope, paid cash. Told Mr. Patterson not to write it down in the ledger." "Why not write it down?" "Because he was planning something he did not want folks knowing about," Ezra said. The boy was smarter than his years. "And I noticed something else, too. His boots. The left one got a chunk missing from the heel. Makes a real distinctive print." Silas felt a surge of something that might have been hope. This was evidence, real physical evidence that connected Blackwood directly to what had happened to Grace. "You did good work, son," Silas said, putting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Real good work." Ezra beamed. "You think it will help, with whatever you are doing?" "It might," Silas said. "But I need you to do something else for me. Something dangerous." The boy straightened up, trying to look older than 14. "I am not afraid." "I know you are not," Silas said. "But fear is not the problem. The problem is powerful men who do not like being challenged. You understand what I am asking?" Ezra nodded. "You need me to testify. About the rope, about the boots." "If it comes to that, yes. Can you do it?" For a moment the boy looked uncertain. Then something hardened in his eyes, something older than his years. "My pa died at Blackwood's mill. They said it was an accident. But I was there. I saw the brake line. It was cut, Mr. Brennan, cut clean through. But nobody would listen to me. I was just a kid." Silas studied the boy's face. "You telling me Blackwood had your father killed?" "I am telling you my pa was about to organize the mill workers, ask for better pay, safer conditions, and 3 days later he was dead. You tell me if that is an accident." Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he squeezed the boy's shoulder. "Your pa would be proud of you, standing up when it matters. That takes courage." "Will you teach me more?" Ezra asked. "Not just tracking. How to be like you, strong, brave." Silas shook his head. "I am not those things, Ezra. I am just a man who finally stopped running from what needs to be done." "That is what brave means," the boy said. They returned to the wagon where Grace waited. Silas helped her up and they started toward the center of town. As they moved through the streets, people began to emerge from their homes. Eyes followed them. Not staring exactly, just noticing. The kind of noticing that meant gossip would start before noon. Silas pulled the wagon up in front of the telegraph office. "I need to send a message," he said to Grace. "Then we will see the doctor." Inside, the air smelled of ink and hot metal. The clerk, an old man named Warner, barely looked up from his desk. Silas slid a few coins across the counter and spoke low, choosing his words like a man selecting tools for a specific job. "I need to send a wire to Sheriff Elijah Crow. He is in the next county over." Warner finally looked up, his eyes narrowing behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "Sheriff Crow, what business you got with him?" "That is between me and the sheriff," Silas said. His voice carried no threat, but something in his tone made Warner nod and reach for his telegraph key. Silas dictated the message, short and simple. "Urgent. Need your help. Murder conspiracy. Come immediately. Brennan." The telegraph key clattered. Dots and dashes flying through copper wire, carrying a message that might save lives or end them. When Warner had finished, he looked at Silas with something that might have been fear or respect. "You know what you are starting?" "Yes," Silas said. "Blackwood will not take kindly to this." "I expect not." Warner hesitated, then reached under his counter and pulled out a carbon copy of the telegram. He held it for a moment as if deciding something important. Then he folded it carefully and tucked it into his vest pocket. "I keep copies," he said quietly. "Of everything. You never know when someone might try to claim a telegram was never sent." It was a small act of rebellion, a tiny stand against power, but it mattered. Outside, Silas and Grace started toward the doctor's office. They had made it perhaps 20 yards when Silas heard bootsteps on the boardwalk behind them. Slow, unhurried, the kind of steps that came from someone who had been waiting. A shadow crossed the window of the general store, then stopped. When Silas turned his hand, moving instinctively toward his hip, a man stood in the doorway of the church across the street. Deacon Douglas Blackwood. At 43, the deacon could have passed for younger. His hair was touched with silver at the temples in a way that made him look distinguished rather than old. His face was clean-shaven and almost handsome in a cold, sharp way. He wore a black suit freshly pressed and carried a Bible under one arm. The kind of man who looked like he should be standing behind a pulpit, not orchestrating cruelty in the shadows. "Morning, Brennan," a voice said from beside Blackwood. Deputy Marshal Clayton Ross stepped out of the shade, one hand resting near his belt, the other holding a folded piece of paper. Behind him, Blackwood smiled, a cold smile that did not reach his eyes. "Thought I would find you here," Blackwood said, his voice carrying that peculiar mix of warmth and menace that some men managed so well. "You always did like to do things proper, Silas." Grace shrank back without actually moving her feet. A kind of internal collapse that made something in Silas's chest hurt to see. Ross unfolded the paper slowly, making sure people on the street could see the official seal. "Got a complaint here," he said. "Abduction and interfering with a lawful husband. Judge's order says she goes back." Blackwood sighed as if this whole situation pained him deeply. "We can do this easy, Brennan, soft enough that nobody gets embarrassed, or we can make it hard." Silas did not answer right away. He read the paper carefully when Ross held it out. He had seen enough legal documents in his life to know when something smelled wrong. This one was clean enough to fool most people. Signed by Justice Hartwell, a man who smiled at church on Sundays and counted money the rest of the week, filed neat and proper, but it was too clean, too quick. Grace had been with Silas less than 24 hours, and already there was a judge's order. That kind of speed required money and influence. Ross shifted his weight, his hand moving closer to the pistol at his side. "Let us not make a show of this, Brennan. The lady belongs with her husband. That is the law." A few people had stopped on the street. A woman muttered something about a wife's duty. A man spat tobacco juice and said Silas ought to mind his own business. The story was already starting to take shape, and it was not the true one. Grace grabbed Silas's sleeve. "Please." she said, not loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Not here. Not like this." Silas raised one hand, asking for a moment's patience from everyone watching. He stepped forward half a pace, putting himself between Grace and Blackwood. "You did not ask her," Silas said quietly. Blackwood smiled. It did not reach his eyes. "I do not need to. She is my wife." Ross lifted his chin. "Paper says she is his. That is the law." The crowd was starting to lean in now, pulled by the drama like moths to a lamp. Silas felt the moment tipping, felt the weight of public opinion beginning to shift against him. He had maybe 10 seconds before this became a spectacle he could not control. So he did something he had not planned, something that came from instinct rather than thought. He drew his revolver, but he did not point it at anyone. Instead, he raised it straight up toward the sky and pulled the trigger. The gunshot cracked across the morning like a whip. Horses jumped. Someone screamed. A woman cursed. The sound echoed off the buildings and then fell away, leaving a silence so thick you could almost chew it. Silas lowered the gun and slid it back into his holster with deliberate care. Every eye in Hollow Creek was on him now. "Nobody is getting dragged anywhere," he said, his voice carrying in the stunned quiet. "Not yet." Ross stared at Silas like he was trying to decide whether to draw his own weapon. Blackwood's smile had slipped just a fraction, replaced by something colder. "You just made this worse for yourself," Blackwood said softly. "Maybe," Silas replied. "Or maybe I just stopped it from getting stupid." Before anyone could respond, another voice cut through the tension. An old man stepped forward from the small crowd that had gathered, his hat in his hands. "That paper do not say he gets to tie her up like an animal," the man said. His name was Henry, the blacksmith, a man with hands scarred from a lifetime of working hot metal. "I seen the rope marks on her wrists. I ain't blind." Another voice joined in, then another. The crowd was shifting, uncertain now. The narrative Blackwood had been building was starting to crack. Blackwood's eyes went hard as flint. "You people do not know what you are talking about," he said, his voice still measured, but with an edge creeping in. Silas leaned in close to Ross, speaking just loud enough for the deputy to hear. "This is not over. You know that." Ross swallowed. "Doctor's office is on this street," he muttered. "After she gets checked, she goes back with Blackwood. That is the deal." "After the doctor," Silas agreed. "We will see what happens then." They walked through the parting crowd, Silas keeping himself positioned between Grace and the two men behind them. The weight of eyes pressed in from all sides, measuring, judging, deciding. The confrontation in the street had been a victory, however small. But as Silas helped Grace up the steps to Dr. Whitmore's office, he could feel Blackwood's eyes on his back. Cold, calculating, already planning the next move. The door to the doctor's office closed behind them, shutting out the street noise and the whispers. But Silas knew they had only bought themselves time. Not much, just enough to prepare for what was coming. Because men like Douglas Blackwood did not lose in public and walk away. They regrouped, they planned, and they struck back twice as hard. Dr. Samuel Whitmore's office sat above the apothecary on Main Street, accessible by a narrow staircase that creaked with age and neglect. The doctor himself was 61 years old, with a thick gray beard and hands that trembled. Not from age, though that played its part. From the bottle he kept in his desk drawer, the one he thought nobody knew about. Silas helped Grace up the stairs, his hand steady on her elbow. She moved slowly, each step an effort. Behind them, Deputy Ross and Deacon Blackwood waited on the street below, watching. The office smelled of carbolic acid and old books and something else underneath. Whiskey poorly disguised. Whitmore looked up when they entered, and Silas saw the color drain from his face. The doctor knew who Grace was, knew what bringing her here meant. "Mr. Brennan," Whitmore said, his voice unsteady, "I did not expect to see you today." "She needs examining," Silas said. "Needs it documented. Official." Whitmore's eyes flickered to the window where Blackwood stood visible on the street below. The doctor swallowed hard. "Perhaps she should see someone in the next town. I am very busy today." Silas stepped closer, his voice dropping to a tone that carried the weight of mountains. "You will examine her, you will write down what you find, and you will sign your name to it, because if you do not, I will go downstairs and tell everyone in earshot about Martha Cole." The name hit Whitmore like a physical blow. His face went from pale to gray, and for a moment Silas thought the old man might collapse right there. "How do you—" Whitmore began, then stopped. His hands shook worse now, and he reached for the desk to steady himself. "Later," Silas said, "after you do your job. Then we talk about Martha Cole, and Sarah, and all the others." Whitmore nodded, defeated. He gestured weakly toward the examination room. "Please, in there." Silas waited outside while Whitmore examined Grace. 20 minutes passed like 20 hours. Through the thin walls he could hear the doctor's questions, Grace's soft answers. He heard Whitmore's sharp intake of breath more than once. Whatever he was finding was bad enough to shock even a man who thought he had seen everything. When they emerged, Grace's face was set like stone, but her eyes were wet. Whitmore looked like he had aged another 10 years. "Well?" Silas asked. Whitmore glanced toward the window again. Blackwood was still there, a dark shape against the morning sun. The doctor licked his lips nervously. "Rope burns on both wrists," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Deep. Infected. Signs of prolonged restraint. Bruising consistent with being struck. Severe malnutrition. Dehydration. The pregnancy." He paused, seeming to gather courage. "The baby's heartbeat is strong, but Mrs. Blackwood is under extreme stress. Any more trauma could trigger early labor. At 7 months, that would be dangerous for both mother and child." "Write it down," Silas said. "All of it." Whitmore hesitated for only a moment, then nodded. He went to his desk and began writing, his hand shaking so badly the pen scratched across the paper. When he finished, he signed his name at the bottom with what looked like physical pain. Grace took the paper and folded it carefully, tucking it into the pocket of her dress. Evidence. Proof that she had not invented her suffering. "There is a back door," Whitmore said suddenly. "Through the storage room. It leads to the alley. You should use it." "Running will not help us now," Silas said. "No." Whitmore's voice cracked. "But it might buy you time, and you are going to need every minute you can get." The doctor went to a cabinet and pulled out a small envelope. He pressed it into Silas's hand. "This was left for you, yesterday, before anyone knew you were bringing her here." Silas opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper with 2 words written in a shaky hand. "Martha Cole." "Who left this?" Silas asked. "I cannot tell you that," Whitmore said. "But someone wants you to know. Someone who has been too afraid to speak up until now." Grace and Silas left through the front door anyway. Hiding would only make them look guilty. When they emerged onto the street, Blackwood and Ross were exactly where they had been waiting like vultures. "Doc give you a clean bill of health?" Blackwood asked, his voice carrying false concern. "He gave me the truth," Grace said. Her voice was stronger now, steadier. "Written and signed, for everyone to see." Blackwood's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Good, good. Then you are healthy enough to come home, with your husband, where you belong." "Tomorrow," Silas said. "Courthouse. We will settle this proper, with a judge and a jury." Ross looked uncomfortable. "Judge Crane already issued his order." "Then he can explain it to Sheriff Crow when he arrives," Silas said. "I sent for him this morning. He will want to review all the evidence before anyone gets dragged anywhere." For the first time, real anger showed on Blackwood's face. Just a flash, quickly controlled, but it was there. "You are making a mistake, Brennan. A big one." "We will see," Silas said. They walked away, leaving Blackwood and Ross standing in the street. But Silas could feel eyes on his back all the way to the wagon, not just Blackwood's eyes. Half the town was watching now, taking sides, making judgments. As Silas helped Grace into the wagon, a woman stepped out from the general store. Ruth Palmer. She was 62, gray-haired and stern-faced, but there was kindness in her eyes when she looked at Grace. "Come by the store when you can," Ruth said quietly. "I have something you need to see." Silas nodded. He clicked his tongue and the wagon rolled forward, carrying them away from the center of town, but not toward his cabin. Instead, he turned toward Ruth's general store, pulling around to the back entrance. Ruth was waiting for them in the storage room behind her shop. The space was dim and dusty, filled with crates and barrels and the smell of dry goods, but it was private. "I heard about what happened in the street," Ruth said. "Whole town is talking about it. Some saying you are a hero, some saying you are a fool." "What do you say?" Silas asked. Ruth looked at Grace for a long moment. "I say my daughter was married to a man like Blackwood once. Different name, same type. He was all charm and Bible verses in public. In private, he was a monster. She finally got the courage to leave him, but he found her. Beat her so bad she never recovered. She died 3 months later." Her voice was steady, but her hands were clenched tight. "I will not let another woman go through what my Sarah did. Not if I can help it." "What do you have for us?" Silas asked. Ruth pulled out a wooden box from behind a stack of crates. Inside was a camera, old but well-maintained, and a collection of glass plate negatives. "I started photographing my ledger pages a year ago," she said, "after Blackwood tried to claim I had overcharged him once, and I could not prove otherwise." She held up one of the glass plates to the light. Even in negative, the entry was clear. "Hemp rope, 50 feet sold to C. Blackwood, cash payment, $47. Samuel Yates came by 2 days ago," Ruth continued. "Said he needed to check my inventory for county tax purposes. While he was here, he tore a page out of my ledger. This page, the one that shows Blackwood bought that rope 3 days before Grace was found tied up." Silas took the glass plate carefully, holding it up to examine. It was perfect. Clear, detailed, dated. Evidence that could not be easily dismissed. "He destroyed the original," Ruth said, "but he did not know about my photographs. And I have more." She pulled out another box. 2 years' worth of transactions, including 3 other purchases of rope by Blackwood. Always cash, always with instructions not to record it. Grace stared at the photographs with something like hope dawning in her eyes. "This proves he planned it." "It proves he bought rope," Ruth said, "but combined with everything else, with the medical report, with witness testimony, it starts to paint a picture." "We need more," Silas said. "We need to show a pattern, show this was not the first time." Ruth's expression darkened. "Then you need to ask about Catherine Miller." The name hung in the air between them. "Who is Catherine Miller?" Grace asked. "A woman who died 5 years ago," Ruth said quietly. "Married to Blackwood, died in childbirth, they said. But there were questions, whispers, nothing anyone could prove." "Where is she buried?" Silas asked. "Cemetery on the hill, east side under the big elm." Ruth paused. "Her sister still lives here. Emma Miller. Works as a seamstress. Lives above the dress shop." Silas nodded slowly, pieces beginning to fit together in his mind. Not a complete picture yet, but the edges starting to show. A sound from the front of the store made them all freeze. Footsteps. Someone entering. Ruth quickly gathered the photographs and put them back in their box. "Storage room," she whispered. "Stay quiet." Silas and Grace pressed back into the shadows between crates while Ruth went to see who had entered. Through a crack in the door, Silas could see into the store proper. Samuel Yates, the county clerk. A weasel of a man with thinning hair and nervous hands. He was looking around the store as if searching for something. Or someone. "Mrs. Palmer," he said when Ruth appeared, "I was wondering if you had seen Mr. Brennan today, or that woman he is harboring." "No idea what you're talking about," Ruth said coolly. "I have been minding my store, as I do every day." "Right, of course." Yates licked his lips. "Well, if you do see them, you should know. Deacon Blackwood has offered a reward, $50 to anyone who provides information leading to the woman's return to her rightful husband." $50, Ruth repeated flatly. That is a lot of money. It is indeed. Yates tried to peer around Ruth into the back rooms. You are sure you have not seen them? I am sure that you need to leave my store, Ruth said, her voice hardening. Unless you are here to buy something. Yates left without another word, but the message had been delivered. Blackwood was putting a price on information, turning neighbors against each other, making it profitable to betray. When Ruth returned to the storage room, her face was grim. You need to leave town, now, before someone decides $50 is worth more than their conscience. No, Silas said. Running makes us look guilty. We stay. We gather our evidence. We force this into the open. You are going to get yourself killed, Ruth said. Maybe, Silas acknowledged. But I am done running from things that need facing. They left through the back door, Silas helping Grace into the wagon once more. As they pulled away from Ruth's store, he noticed a figure watching from the alley across the street, too distant to identify but close enough to see where they had been. Word was spreading, sides were being chosen, and the clock was ticking down toward a confrontation that could only end one way. The ride back to Silas's cabin took them through the edge of town, past the church where Blackwood preached his Sunday sermons, past the lumber mill where Ezra's father had died, past the cemetery where Catherine Miller lay buried under the elm tree. Silas pulled the wagon to a stop at the cemetery gates. I need to see something, he said. Grace nodded understanding without needing explanation. Some truths were written on tombstones. The cemetery was quiet, peaceful rows of simple wooden markers and occasional stone monuments. The elm tree Ruth had mentioned stood on the east side, its branches spreading wide like sheltering arms. Beneath it, a single stone marker. Catherine Miller, born 1863, died 1887. Beloved daughter, beloved wife. Silas knelt beside the grave, studying the ground around it. Nothing unusual, just grass and the fallen leaves of autumn past. But something about the dates bothered him. Born 1863. That would make her 24 when she died. Same age Sarah had been, died 1887, 5 years ago. The stone was weathered but not ancient. Someone still tended this grave. Fresh flowers lay against the marker, not yet wilted. She was so young, Grace whispered. Yes, Silas agreed. And she was married to Blackwood, his first wife, first that we know of. They stood there in the silence of the dead, both thinking about what Ruth had said. Questions, whispers, nothing anyone could prove, until now. As they turned to leave, Silas noticed something carved into the bark of the elm tree, high enough that you would miss it unless you were looking. Initials, CM and EM, inside a rough heart. Catherine and Emma, sisters who had loved each other. One dead one left behind to remember. The sun was dropping toward the western peaks by the time they reached the cabin. Silas helped Grace inside, then spent an hour checking his defenses. The tin can alarms, the sight lines, the ammunition stores, everything a soldier learned to check before battle, because battle was coming. He could feel it, the way animals feel storms building beyond the horizon. He was splitting wood for the evening fire when he heard horses on the trail. 3 riders coming fast. Silas set down the axe and picked up his rifle, moving to a position where he had both cover and clear line of sight. The lead rider came into view, and Silas lowered the rifle. Sheriff Elijah Crow. Even at 55, Crow sat a horse like a man born to it, tall and lean with gray hair and a face that had seen too much of the world's ugliness but had not surrendered to it. He had been the first black man elected sheriff in this part of West Virginia back during Reconstruction, and he had held the position through a combination of competence, courage, and careful political navigation. The 2 men with him were deputies from the next county over. Young, nervous-looking hands near their pistols. Crow dismounted slowly, his eyes taking in the scene. The defensive positions Silas had set up, the rifle leaning against the porch rail, the tension that hung over the clearing like smoke. Silas, Crow said simply. Elijah. They clasped hands, the grip of men who had shared foxholes at Antietam, who knew what it meant to trust someone with your life. Got your wire, Crow said. Rode through the night to get here. Figured if you were asking for help, things must be bad." "They are," Silas said. Grace appeared in the doorway of the cabin, and Crow touched his hat brim. "Ma'am, Sheriff Elijah Crow." "Grace Thornton," she said quietly. Crow's deputies stayed mounted, watching the tree line. They had the look of men expecting trouble. "Let's talk inside," Crow said. "Away from eyes." In the cabin over coffee strong enough to strip paint, Silas laid out everything: the rope, the torture, Blackwood's pattern of targeting vulnerable women, the destroyed evidence, the medical report, and a journal that had mysteriously appeared on his porch that morning bearing Deputy Ross's name. Wait. Silas realized he had not told Grace about Ross yet. "What journal?" Grace asked. Silas went to the chest where he kept his important papers and pulled out the leather-bound book. "This morning before we rode to town I found it. On my porch. No note. Just this journal wrapped in oilcloth. Inside the cover, one word, Ross." He paused, his jaw tight. "Someone left it for me. Someone who wanted me to know the truth. I have not had time to read it carefully until now." He had not had time to examine it closely, had been too focused on keeping Grace safe. Now he opened it and began to read. The journal was devastating. Page after page of transactions, dates, amounts. Properties acquired after owners mysteriously died or disappeared. Payments made to various officials. Judge Hartwell, County Clerk Yates, 3 members of the town council, and there in Ross's neat handwriting were the damnations August 10th. "Blackwood demands I arrest Brennan on false charges if he interferes with Thornton's situation. Offered $500. I refused. He threatened to expose my gambling debts. I am trapped." July 3rd. Blackwood jokes about Catherine Miller. Says problem-solving is easier with arsenic than lawyers. He was drunk. Probably does not remember saying it, but I wrote it down. Insurance. May 22nd. Martha Cole dying. Husband begs Blackwood for credit extension to buy medicine. Blackwood refuses. Says they need to learn fiscal responsibility. Cole dead 3 days later. Blackwood forecloses on farm. On and on. A catalog of cruelty and manipulation. A system of power and corruption laid bare in one dead man's handwriting. "Ross was planning to testify," Silas said quietly. "That is why he left this journal. Insurance." Crow read through the journal, his expression growing darker with each page. When he finished, he looked at Silas with something like awe. "You have enough here to hang Blackwood 10 times over," Crow said. "Murder, conspiracy, bribery, fraud." "If we can get it into court," Silas said, "if we can find a judge who is not in Blackwood's pocket, if we can protect the witnesses long enough to testify." "Big ifs," Crow acknowledged, "but possible." Crow was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the table. "There is a circuit judge coming through next week, Judge Anderson, from Charleston. She is honest, hard as nails, cannot be bought." "She?" Grace asked. "Yes, ma'am. One of the first women judges in West Virginia, appointed last year. Has a reputation for not tolerating nonsense from powerful men." Crow smiled grimly. "Blackwood is going to hate her." "Can you delay Judge Crane's order until she arrives?" Silas asked. "I can try. File an appeal. Demand a jury trial. That will buy us time." Crow stood pacing the small cabin. "But we need more than Ross's journal. We need living witnesses. People willing to stand up in court and point at Blackwood and say what he did." "We have some," Silas said. "Ruth Palmer, the blacksmith Henry, young Ezra Pike from the stable." "Not enough," Crow said. "We need more. We need to show a pattern going back years. We need Catherine Miller's story told proper." "Her sister Emma is still in town," Grace said. "Ruth mentioned her." Crow nodded slowly. "Then we talk to Emma. We find out what really happened to Catherine, and we build a case so strong even Blackwood's money cannot tear it down." One of Crow's deputies appeared in the doorway. "Sheriff, we got movement on the trail, someone watching us from the ridge." Silas was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. Through the window he could see the ridge line where the forest gave way to exposed rock. A figure stood there silhouetted against the dying sun. Too far to identify, but close enough to see everything happening at the cabin. The figure stood for perhaps 30 seconds, making no attempt to hide. A message. "We know where you are. We are watching." Then the figure turned and disappeared into the trees. "They know you are here," Silas said to Crow. "Good," Crow replied. "Let them know. Let them know the law has arrived. Let them know this is not just some mountain hermit they can intimidate." But Silas knew better. Blackwood was not trying to intimidate. He was gathering intelligence, counting numbers, planning his next move, and his next move would not be legal. Night fell with the weight of a falling stone. Crow and his deputies set up camp in the clearing in front of the cabin, building a fire and posting watches. Silas appreciated the show of force, but he also knew it made them a bigger target. Inside, Grace sat by the small table, her hand resting on her belly. The baby was moving. Silas could see the subtle shifts beneath her dress, life asserting itself in the middle of death and danger. "You should eat something," Silas said, setting down a plate of beans and cornbread. Grace picked at the food without appetite. "Do you think we can win?" "I think we can fight," Silas said. "Winning and fighting are not always the same thing, but fighting is all we can control." "That is not very comforting." "No," Silas agreed, "but it is honest." Grace was quiet for a moment, then, "Tell me about Sarah, your Sarah." Silas had not spoken about Sarah to anyone in 3 years, had kept her memory locked away like something too precious to expose to air. But something about Grace's question, about the quiet way she asked, made him want to answer. "She read," he said finally, "books, all the time. Brought 50 of them from Baltimore when we married. Taught me to read better than I could. I was a soldier. I knew how to kill, how to survive. She taught me how to live." "What happened to her?" Silas was quiet for a long time, long enough that Grace probably thought he would not answer. Then, "She went into labor 3 weeks early. Something was wrong. Baby was breached. I rode down the mountain in the dark horse, foaming, desperate to bring back Dr. Whitmore. But he would not come." "Why not?" "Said he needed payment up front, $50. I did not have $50. Barely had 5. Silas's voice was flat, emotionless, the way men speak when the pain is too deep for expression. "By the time I got back, she was gone. Baby, too. I buried them under the oak tree out back, the one where she used to sit in the afternoons." Grace reached across the table and took his hand. Her grip was gentle but firm. "I am sorry." "I thought for 3 years it was my fault," Silas said. "Thought if I had been more successful, made more money, saved more, I could have paid Whitmore and she would have lived. But now I know something else was happening, something I did not understand until I found Ross's journal." He looked at Grace and she saw something dark and terrible in his eyes. "I think Whitmore was paid not to come. I think someone wanted Sarah dead, wanted me broken, desperate enough to sell my land cheap." Grace's hand tightened on his. "Blackwood. Maybe, maybe not. But I am going to find out." They sat in the darkness together, 2 people bound by suffering and circumstance, neither alone anymore. Outside, one of Crow's deputies called out a challenge, footsteps approaching from the trail. Silas was up and moving before the echo-faded rifle in hand. But it was not Blackwood's men. It was Ezra, running hard, his breath coming in gasps. "Mr. Brennan, Sheriff." The boy stumbled into the firelight. "They are coming. Reeves and his men. I heard them at the tavern, planning. They are going to attack tonight." "How many?" Crow asked, all business now. 8, maybe 10. Well armed. Reeves says Blackwood is paying $100 per man to end this quiet." Silas and Crow exchanged looks. They had perhaps 30 minutes before an armed force descended on the cabin. 3 lawmen and 1 aging mountain man against 10 professional fighters. Not good odds. "We need to evacuate," one of the deputies said. "Get the woman to safety." "No time," Crow said. "They have men watching the trails. We would ride right into an ambush." "Then we defend," Silas said. He was already moving, checking weapons, positioning ammunition, the soldier in him taking over. "We have high ground. Good cover. Limited approaches. We can hold." "Against 10 men?" the deputy asked, his voice rising. "Against 100 if we have to," Silas said. His voice carried absolute certainty. "Because we do not have a choice." They prepared in the way soldiers prepare, with efficiency born of necessity. Barricades at the windows, weapons positioned for easy access, water buckets in case of fire, escape routes identified if defense became impossible. Grace watched from the corner, her hand on her belly, her face pale but composed. She held Sarah's small pistol in her lap, ready if it came to that. Ezra stayed, despite Silas's order to run. "I can shoot," the boy said. "My pa taught me, and you taught me to track. I am not leaving." Silas saw in Ezra's eyes the same determination he had seen in young soldiers at Antietam. Boys becoming men too fast, thrust into violence not of their choosing, but rising to meet it anyway. "Stay low," Silas said. "Fire only when you have a clear target. And if I tell you to run, you run. Understand?" "Yes, sir." The moon rose full and bright, turning the clearing silver. Good for defenders, bad for attackers. Anyone approaching would be silhouetted against the pale ground. They came at midnight. Silas heard them before he saw them, the whisper of men moving through forest, trying to be quiet but failing. Too many of them too heavily armed, metal clicking against metal, leather creaking, breathing. He raised his hand and everyone inside the cabin went silent. The first torch appeared at the edge of the clearing, then another, then 6 more. 8 men on horseback, faces hidden by shadow and firelight. Jacob Reeves sat at the front, a big man broad-shouldered with a rifle across his saddle. Bounty hunter and hired gun, a man who worked for whoever paid best. "Brennan," Reeves called out, "we know you are in there. We know you got the woman. Send her out peaceful-like, and we all ride away. Nobody needs to get hurt." Silas did not answer. He had learned in the war that sometimes silence was the best weapon, made the enemy uncertain, made them wonder what you were planning. "You are making this harder than it needs to be," Reeves continued. "Mr. Blackwood just wants what is legally his. You are the one breaking the law here." Still silence from the cabin. One of the younger riders, more nervous than the rest, urged his horse forward a few steps. "Maybe they ain't here. Maybe they ran." "They are here," Reeves said. "Brennan is too stubborn to run." The young rider raised his torch and threw it toward the cabin. It landed in the dirt about 10 feet from the porch, flames sputtering but not going out. A warning. A threat. Silas took careful aim and fired a single shot. The bullet kicked up dirt 2 inches in front of the young rider's horse. The animal reared, nearly throwing its rider, and the man cursed in fear and surprise. "Next one will not be a warning," Silas called out, his voice carrying across the clearing. Reeves held up a hand, stopping his men from returning fire. Whatever Blackwood was paying him, it probably was not enough to risk a murder charge if things went sideways. "You cannot hold us off forever, Brennan," Reeves shouted. "We got time, we got numbers, and we got the law on our side." "The law is right here," Crow's voice rang out. "Sheriff Elijah Crow duly appointed. You boys are trespassing and threatening officers of the law. I suggest you reconsider your position." That gave Reeves pause. Whatever he had expected, it was not a sheriff from outside the county. His men shifted uneasily in their saddles. "You are outside your jurisdiction, Crow," Reeves said finally. "I am pursuing a murder investigation," Crow replied. "That gives me jurisdiction anywhere in this state. Now you have 2 choices. Ride away now or face charges of attempted murder of peace officers. Your call." The standoff stretched, seconds becoming minutes. The horses stamped and snorted. Men adjusted their grips on weapons, everyone waiting to see who would move first. Then one of Reeves's men made the decision for everyone. He drew his pistol and fired wildly toward the cabin. The bullet went wide, thunking into wood somewhere to Silas's left. But it was enough. Violence called to violence, and suddenly everyone was shooting. Silas picked his targets with cold precision. Not to kill, Not yet. But to disable, to frighten, to make them reconsider. His first shot took a man in the shoulder, spinning him out of the saddle. His second shot killed a horse, and the rider went down hard when the animal fell. Crow and his deputies were firing from the windows, their muzzle flashes lighting up the interior. Ezra crouched by the door pistol in shaking hands, waiting for his moment. The firefight lasted perhaps 3 minutes, though it felt like hours. Smoke filled the air. Horses screamed. Men shouted and cursed. Lead whined off stone and wood. Silas was moving to a new position when he felt it. A punch to his side like someone had hit him with a hammer. He looked down and saw blood spreading across his shirt. Bullet had grazed his ribs. Painful, but not fatal. He kept moving, kept firing, giving no sign he had been hit. Pain was information. Information could be processed later. Through the smoke and chaos, he saw 2 of Reeves's men circling toward the barn, toward where Ezra had left his post to help with the defense. They were going to flank the cabin, catch them in crossfire. "Ezra!" Silas shouted. "Barn 2 riders!" The boy spun, saw the threat, and without hesitation ran out the back door. Silas tried to cover him, firing at the approaching riders, but Ezra was in the open now, exposed, just a 14-year-old boy with a pistol facing grown men with murder on their minds. One of the riders saw Ezra and turned his horse, raising his rifle. Time slowed. Silas was too far to help, too far to do anything but watch. Ezra fired first. The shot took the rider in the chest, and he fell backward off his horse, hitting the ground and not moving. The second rider wheeled around, bringing his own weapon to bear, but Crow was there, firing from the cabin window, and the man slumped over his saddle horn. Ezra stood frozen, staring at what he had done, at the man he had killed, at the blood spreading across the dirt. "Ezra, move!" Silas shouted. The boy snapped out of it and ran back toward the cabin, diving through the door just as more bullets chewed splinters from the frame. Reeves saw the tide turning, saw his men falling or fleeing, saw that whatever Blackwood was paying, it was not worth dying for. He wheeled his horse and shouted retreat. The remaining riders followed, disappearing into the trees, leaving behind 2 dead horses, 1 dead man, and 3 wounded. The silence after gunfire is always strange, ears ringing, smoke drifting, the smell of blood and powder and fear. Crow's deputies moved out carefully, checking the fallen men. 1 dead, as Ezra had said. 2 wounded but alive. The third had run off into the woods, clutching a shattered arm. Silas stood at the doorway, his hand pressed against his wounded side. Blood seeped between his fingers, but the flow was already slowing. Just a graze. He had had worse. Grace appeared beside him with clean cloth torn from a sheet. Without speaking, she began wrapping his ribs, her hands gentle but efficient. She had learned care in the convent, learned how to tend wounds. "You are hurt," she said. "I am alive," Silas replied. "That is what matters." Across the clearing, Ezra sat on the porch steps, his pistol lying beside him, his head in his hands. Silas walked over, moving stiffly, and sat down next to the boy. "I killed him," Ezra whispered. "I killed a man." "You did," Silas agreed. He did not try to soften it, did not lie. "And it will haunt you. For a long time. Maybe forever. Does it get easier?" "No, nor should it." Silas put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "Taking a life should never be easy, should never feel natural, but sometimes it is necessary to protect life. You protected us tonight, protected Grace and her baby. That matters." Ezra looked up, his face streaked with tears. "I am scared." "Good. Fear means you understand what you did, means you are not a killer at heart. Killers do not feel fear. They do not see faces, just targets." Silas gripped the boy's shoulder harder. "You are not a killer, Ezra. You are a protector. Remember that difference. It is important." They sat together in the aftermath, man and boy, both carrying new weights they could never put down. Crow approached, his face grim. "We captured one of them, Jacob Reeves. Horse got shot out from under him in the retreat. He is offering to talk." "In exchange for what?" Silas asked. "His life. Says he will testify against Blackwood. Give us everything. Names, dates, payments. All of it." Silas stood slowly, his ribs protesting. "Let us hear what he has to say." They had Reeves tied to a post near the barn. Blood streamed from a cut on his forehead where he had hit the ground when his horse fell, but his eyes were alert, calculating. A man weighing his options and choosing survival. "How much is Blackwood paying you to stay silent?" Crow asked. $500, Reeves said. "Half now, half when the woman is delivered back to him. And for your testimony against him, my life, that is worth more than $500. Crow nodded. 20 years hard labor instead of hanging. You will be old when you get out, but alive." "Put it in writing," Reeves said. Crow pulled out paper and pencil and wrote out the agreement right there by lamplight. Reeves signed it and Crow countersigned as witness. "Now talk," Crow said. And Reeves did. He talked for an hour, laying out Blackwood's operation in detail. The systematic targeting of vulnerable women with property. The arrangement with Victor Gaines, a traveling preacher who was actually Blackwood's cousin, who would identify targets and create circumstances. The payoffs to officials. The intimidation. The murders made to look like accidents or natural causes. "Catherine Miller," Reeves said. "Blackwood wanted her gone. She inherited land from her father, prime timberland. She refused to sign it over to him, so he had me make her sick, arsenic in her food, little bit every day, took 3 months. Doc Whitmore signed the death certificate saying childbirth complications." "Sarah Brennan?" Silas asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Reeves looked at him and seemed to understand he was on dangerous ground. "Blackwood wanted your land, borders his on 2 sides. You would not sell. So he needed you desperate, needed you broken. He paid Whitmore $500 to delay when your wife went into labor. By the time Whitmore showed up, it was too late." Silas said nothing, could not trust himself to speak. The rage that filled him was cold and total, the kind of rage that made men do terrible things. Grace's hand found his, squeezed, bringing him back from the edge. "How many?" Crow asked. "How many women? How many deaths?" 6 women over 12 years, Reeves said, plus collateral. Husbands who got in the way, workers who asked questions, maybe 20 people total. The number hung in the air like an accusation. "And the law?" Crow asked. "Judge Crane Ross. Crane gets $1,000 a year to look the other way. Yates gets $500. Ross refused payment, but Blackwood had leverage, gambling debts. Ross was trapped." "What about Ross?" "Ross refused to help anymore. Told Blackwood he was done. Blackwood had me threaten him, rough him up, make him disappear if needed. But Ross was smart. He hid this journal, left it where Brennan would find it. Then he ran. Left town 3 days ago. I assume he is in Ohio or Pennsylvania by now, hiding." Crow finished writing everything down. 3 pages of testimony signed and witnessed, enough to bury Blackwood forever. "One more thing," Reeves said. "Blackwood is not working alone. There is a network. Rich men from Pittsburgh to Richmond. They call themselves the Land Acquisition Society. Buy up property cheap by targeting vulnerable owners. Blackwood runs the West Virginia operation, but there are others, other towns, other women." The scope of it was staggering. Not just one man's cruelty, but a conspiracy spanning states. Dawn came pale and cold. Silas sat on the porch, his ribs wrapped tight, watching the sun climb over the eastern peaks. Grace brought him coffee and sat beside him. "Do you think we can win?" she asked. Silas sipped the coffee, thinking. "I think we have to try. Not just for you, for all of them. Catherine, Sarah, Martha, all the ones whose names we do not know yet." "That is not an answer." "No," Silas agreed, "but it is the truth." Sheriff Crow emerged from the cabin already dressed and ready despite having slept perhaps 2 hours. "Circuit Court opens today. Judge Anderson arrived last night. I filed the emergency appeal. She agreed to hear it." "What about Crane's order?" "Suspended pending review. Grace stays with you until the hearing." Crow pulled out his pocket watch. "Which is in 3 hours. We need to ride." They gathered what evidence they had. Ross's journal, Reeves's testimony, Ruth's photographs, Whitmore's medical report, everything packed carefully into saddlebags. Ezra appeared looking exhausted but determined. "I am coming with you." "It is dangerous," Silas said. "I know. I am still coming." They rode into Hollow Creek as the town was waking. Word had already spread about the attack, about Reeves's capture, about what was coming. People lined the streets watching, whispering, taking sides. The courthouse sat at the center of town, a 2-story building with peeling white paint. People were already crowding inside, filling benches and standing along the walls. The air was thick with tension and body heat and the particular electricity that comes when a community is forced to confront uncomfortable truths about itself. Judge Anderson sat behind the makeshift bench, and Silas understood immediately why Blackwood would hate her. She was perhaps 50, with iron-gray hair, pulled back, severely sharp eyes that missed nothing, and an expression that suggested she had seen every trick in the book and was not impressed by any of them. To the right sat Douglas Blackwood, still immaculate in his black suit, Bible positioned prominently on the table before him. But something had changed in his face. The mask was still in place, but cracks were showing, rage simmering just beneath the surface. Beside him sat Franklin Pierce, the lawyer from Charleston. Expensive suit, distinguished bearing, and the kind of confidence that came from winning cases with money rather than truth. On the left, Sheriff Crow, Silas Grace, and the local prosecutor, Daniel Wright. No fancy credentials, just evidence and determination. The gallery was packed beyond capacity. Ruth Palmer sat in front with the women from her circle. Ezra was in back, pale but present. Dr. Whitmore sat isolated to one side, looking like he wanted to disappear. Judge Anderson banged her gavel 3 times. "This court is now in session." The battle was about to begin. Silas sat straight-backed in his chair, his hand resting near where his knife was concealed beneath his jacket, not planning to use it, but ready if things went sideways, because in that moment, watching Blackwood's cold eyes, watching the calculation and rage warring behind them, Silas knew this would not end with words alone. Some debts could only be paid in blood. Judge Anderson surveyed the courtroom with eyes that had seen too many men try to buy their way out of justice. She was 52 years old, one of the first women judges in West Virginia appointed, not because she was soft or sympathetic, but because she was harder than most men and fairer than all of them. "Before we begin," she said, her voice carrying authority that needed no volume, "I want to make certain things clear. This is a court of law, not a theater. There will be order maintained at all times. Anyone who disrupts these proceedings will be removed and held in contempt. Is that understood?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gallery. "Very well. Mr. Pierce, you represent the petitioner, Douglas Blackwood." Franklin Pierce stood smoothly buttoning his expensive jacket. "I do, Your Honor." "And Sheriff Crow, you represent both Mr. Silas Brennan and Miss Grace Thornton in this matter." "I do, Your Honor, along with Prosecutor Daniel Wright." Judge Anderson nodded. "This court has reviewed the emergency appeal filed by Sheriff Crow and finds sufficient cause to suspend Judge Crane's order pending full evidentiary hearing. We will impanel a jury to hear testimony regarding both the civil matter of marital return and the criminal charges that have been raised. Bailiff, bring in the jury pool." The next hour was consumed by jury selection. Pierce challenged anyone who looked sympathetic to Grace. Crow challenged anyone who had business dealings with Blackwood. In the end, 12 citizens remained. 6 men, 6 women. Ruth Palmer was selected as forewoman, and Silas took that as either a very good sign or evidence of Judge Anderson's confidence that the evidence would speak for itself. The jury was sworn. The courtroom settled into tense anticipation. "Mr. Pierce," Judge Anderson said, "your opening statement." Pierce walked to the center of the room with the confidence of a man who had won 100 cases just like this one. Except this case was not like any other, and the longer he spoke, the more Silas could see him realizing it. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Pierce began, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "This case is remarkably simple, not complicated by obscure legal theories or emotional appeals, just simple, straightforward facts that any reasonable person can understand." He paused, making eye contact with each juror. My client Deacon Douglas Blackwood is a pillar of this community. I do not believe anyone here would seriously dispute that. He built the church where many of you worship every Sunday. He operates the lumber mill that provides employment to 24 men and their families. He has extended credit to struggling families when banks turned them away. He has been the backbone that has allowed Hollow Creek to survive and thrive. Pierce began walking slowly along the gallery, making the jury part of his narrative. 6 weeks ago, Deacon Blackwood performed what I can only describe as an extraordinary act of Christian charity. Sister Grace Thornton, a nun from Baltimore, found herself in extremely difficult circumstances. She was with child abandoned by the man responsible, facing excommunication from her order and complete destitution. No family to turn to, no means of support, no prospects whatsoever. Silas felt Grace tense beside him, but she kept her face carefully composed. Deacon Blackwood could have turned away, Pierce continued. Many men would have, but moved by his deep Christian faith and genuine compassion, he made a different choice. He offered Sister Thornton his name, his home, his protection, his willingness to raise another man's child as his own. He asked nothing in return except that she honor the vows they would make before God and this community. Pierce returned to his table and picked up a document, holding it high. This is their marriage certificate, properly signed by both parties, witnessed by Samuel Yates, our county clerk, bearing the seal of the Sisters of Charity in Baltimore, countersigned by Justice Hartwell of this county. This is not some hasty, questionable arrangement. This is a legal binding marriage in every sense. He set the document down and turned to face Grace directly. But Mrs. Blackwood, perhaps overwhelmed by her difficulties, perhaps influenced by well-meaning but misguided voices, chose to flee from her husband's home. She chose to break the sacred vows she had made. And Mr. Silas Brennan, rather than encouraging her to return and honor her commitments, rather than seeking reconciliation, chose to harbor her, to hide her, to keep her from the man she had promised before God to obey. Pierce's voice grew harder, more accusatory. That is not charity. That is not Christian kindness. That is abduction. That is interference with a legal marriage. That is one man deciding his judgment matters more than the law, more than the church, more than the bonds of holy matrimony. He returned to his seat, looking thoroughly satisfied. That is why we are here today, seeking justice, asking that Mrs. Blackwood be returned to her rightful place as Deacon Blackwood's lawfully wedded wife. Around the courtroom, Silas could see people nodding. It had been a good argument, clean and logical, built on documents and social expectations, the kind of argument that won cases. Judge Anderson turned to the prosecution table. Sheriff Crow. Crow rose slowly, taking his time. He did not have Pierce's polish or expensive education, but he had truth, and he had 30 years of mountain justice behind him. And sometimes that was enough. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen," Crow began. His voice was clear and strong, carrying the weight of conviction. "Mr. Pierce is right about one thing. This case is simple, but not in the way he claims." He walked to where Grace sat. "The simple truth here is that Grace Thornton was never a willing wife. She was a prisoner, a victim, and Mr. Brennan did not abduct her. He rescued her from a situation that would have killed her and her unborn child." Crow turned to face the jury directly. 3 days ago, Mr. Brennan was hunting in the mountains when he heard crying. He followed that sound and found this woman tied to a fallen tree on Blackwood property, not resting, not sitting in contemplation. Bound with new rope, her hands secured so tight the circulation was cut off her body, lashed to that trunk like an animal on display. Several jury members leaned forward, drawn in despite themselves. She was left there in the August sun with barely enough water to survive, Crow continued. Close enough to the Blackwood ranch that she could see the buildings and hear the windmill, but too far for anyone passing by to hear her cries for help. That is not how a husband treats a wife. That is torture. A deliberate demonstration of power by a man who wanted everyone to know he could do whatever he wanted and no one would stop him. Crow's voice hardened, and when Mr. Brennan cut her loose and brought her to safety, Deacon Blackwood did not come looking with concern and care. He sent hired men in the night, multiple attempts to take her by force. He has been using every ounce of his considerable power to get her back, not because he loves her, but because she represents something he cannot tolerate, a challenge to his authority. Judge Anderson shifted in her seat. Sheriff Crow, these are serious allegations. Do you have evidence? Substantial evidence, Your Honor. Crow pulled out a stack of documents. Physical evidence, documentary evidence, witness testimony, and furthermore, he pulled out the petition he had filed. I have a request signed by 22 citizens of Hollow Creek demanding that this matter be decided by a jury of their peers, as is their right under the Constitution of West Virginia and the United States. He handed the petition to Judge Anderson, who read it carefully. Her expression gave nothing away, but Silas saw her eyebrows rise slightly at some of the names. 22 signatures. That was significant in a town this size. This is highly irregular, Judge Anderson said, but the law is clear. Both parties have the right to trial by jury when criminal charges are involved, and I see that criminal charges have indeed been filed: assault, unlawful imprisonment, conspiracy, and, she paused, murder. The courtroom erupted. Judge Anderson's gavel came down hard, 3 times. 4. Finally, order returned. We will proceed as requested, Anderson said. Mr. Crow, call your first witness. The prosecution calls Dr. Samuel Whitmore. Whitmore stood slowly, looking like he had aged 20 years overnight. He walked to the witness stand like a man walking to his own execution. Perhaps he was. He was sworn and his voice barely audible. Dr. Whitmore, Crow began gently. How long have you practiced medicine in Hollow Creek? 23 years. And in that time have you treated patients at Deacon Blackwood's request? Yes, many times. Did you examine Grace Thornton 2 days ago? I did. Tell the jury what you found. Whitmore took a shaky breath. Rope burns on both wrists. Deep, infected, clear evidence of prolonged restraint, bruising consistent with being struck multiple times, severe malnutrition, dehydration, the pregnancy. His voice cracked. The baby's heartbeat is strong, but the mother is under extreme stress. Any additional trauma could trigger premature labor, which at 7 months would be dangerous for both. Did the injuries you observed appear self-inflicted or consensual? Absolutely not. These were torture injuries. Pierce stood. Objection. The witness is offering medical opinion, not objective fact. Your Honor, Crow said, Dr. Whitmore has 23 years of medical experience. He is qualified to distinguish between consensual restraint and torture. Overruled, Anderson said. Continue. Crow pulled out a document. Is this the medical report you prepared? It is. And is everything in this report accurate to the best of your knowledge? Whitmore hesitated for just a moment. Then something seemed to break inside him. Some dam that had been holding back 3 years of guilt and shame and self-loathing. Yes, he said, but there is more. Things I did not put in the report because I was a coward. The courtroom went silent. Even Pierce seemed caught off guard. What things? Crow asked quietly. Whitmore's hands gripped the arms of his chair until his knuckles went white. I need to tell you about Martha Cole. For the next 30 minutes, Whitmore laid bare his sins. Martha Cole, who had needed $40 worth of medicine for pneumonia. Her husband Matthew begging Blackwood for a credit extension. Blackwood refusing, saying they needed to learn fiscal responsibility. Whitmore going to Blackwood pleading for help. He offered me $200. Whitmore said, tears streaming down his face now. $200 to let her die and keep quiet about it. And God forgive me, I took the money. Several women in the gallery were crying. Men stared at Whitmore with expressions ranging from disgust to pity. She died 3 days later, Whitmore continued. A simple infection that could have been cured with $20 worth of medicine. And 3 months after that, Blackwood foreclosed on the Cole farm. Matthew hanged himself a week later. Left behind 3 children. Judge Anderson let the silence stretch. Let the weight of it settle over the courtroom. Is there anything else, Dr. Whitmore? Crow asked. Whitmore looked directly at Silas. Yes. I need to tell you about Sarah Brennan. Silas felt his chest tighten. This was the moment, the truth he had suspected but not known for certain. The night of April 7, 1886. Whitmore said, Silas Brennan came to my door. His wife was in labor. Something was wrong. She was screaming. He was desperate, begged me to come help her. Whitmore's voice broke completely. I told him I needed $50, cash, up front. He did not have $50. He offered me everything he owned, his land, his livestock, everything. I refused. Why? Crow asked, though everyone in the room could guess. Because Douglas Blackwood had already paid me $500 to delay, to make excuses, to ensure Sarah Brennan died in childbirth. The courtroom exploded. Judge Anderson's gavel was drowned out by shouting by the sound of Silas's chair scraping back as he stood by Grace grabbing his arm to keep him from lunging at Whitmore or Blackwood or both. It took 5 full minutes to restore order. When the room finally quieted, Whitmore continued, his voice dead and flat. Blackwood wanted Silas's land. It borders his property on 2 sides, prime timber access. Silas would not sell at any price. So Blackwood decided to make him desperate, make him broken. A widower with nothing left would sell cheap just to escape the memories. Did Sarah Brennan die because of your delay? Crow asked. Yes. By the time I finally went up the mountain, it was too late. The baby was breached. Sarah had bled too much. Both were dead within the hour. Whitmore looked at Silas. I murdered your wife, and I murdered your child, for $500. Silas stood perfectly still. His face showed nothing. But his hands were shaking, and Grace's grip on his arm was the only thing keeping him anchored to this world. Why tell us now? Crow asked. Because I am dying, Whitmore said simply. Liver cancer, 6 months at most. And I cannot meet God with these sins on my soul without at least trying to make them right. He pulled out several leather-bound journals from beneath his coat. These are my records. Every bribe Blackwood paid me, every death certificate I falsified, every lie I told. It goes back 15 years. 6 women dead. Catherine Miller, Sarah Brennan, Martha Cole, 3 others whose names most of you would not know, plus 7 men who died in accidents at Blackwood's mill that were not accidents at all. He set the journals on the witness stand. This is my confession, my testimony, and my plea for forgiveness, though I know I do not deserve it. Pierce's cross-examination was brutal, trying to destroy Whitmore's credibility, attacking him as a drunk, a liar, someone who would say anything to save himself. But Whitmore did not fight back, did not defend himself, just kept repeating the same thing. Everything I said is true. It is all in the journals, dates, payments, deaths. Verify it yourself. When Whitmore finally left the stand, he looked somehow lighter, as if confession had lifted a weight he had been carrying for 15 years. He sat down in the gallery alone and waited for judgment. Ruth Palmer was called next. She presented her photographs of the ledger showing Blackwood's rope purchase, showed the torn page where Yates had tried to destroy evidence, explained her system of documenting everything, of building insurance against powerful men who thought they could rewrite history. Then Ezra Pike took the stand. The boy was terrified, his voice shaking as he swore the oath. But when Crow asked him what he had witnessed, Ezra's voice steadied. I saw Deacon Blackwood at the lumber yard 3 days before Miss Grace was found tied up. He bought 50 feet of hemp rope, paid cash, told Mr. Patterson not to write it down in the ledger. How do you know he said that? I was in the next aisle. They did not see me. I heard everything. Did you notice anything else about Deacon Blackwood that day? Yes, sir. His boots. The left one has a chunk missing from the heel, makes a real distinctive print. I am a tracker. Mr. Brennan taught me. I notice things like that. Crow produced photographs of boot prints, one from the tree where Grace had been tied, one from Blackwood's own boot. The notch in the heel matched perfectly. Your witness? Crow said to Pierce. Pierce stood adjusting his cuffs. Mr. Pike, you say Mr. Brennan taught you tracking. Would you say anything to help your mentor? No, sir. I would tell the truth. Even if the truth hurt Mr. Brennan. Especially then. He taught me that honor matters more than comfort. Pierce changed tactics. "You are an orphan, are you not?" "Yes, sir." "And your father died at Blackwood's mill?" "Yes, sir." "So you have reason to hate my client." Ezra was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was clear and steady. "I have reason to want justice for my father. That is not the same as hate." "But you blame Mr. Blackwood for your father's death." "I know my father was about to organize the mill workers to ask for better pay and safer conditions. I know 3 days after he told Blackwood that my father died in an accident. I know I was there, and I saw the brake line on the lumber lift. It was cut clean through, not frayed, not worn, cut." "Did anyone investigate this alleged cutting?" "No, sir. Deputy Ross said it was an accident, and that was that." Pierce tried several more angles, but Ezra did not waver. The boy had learned well from Silas. Stick to the truth. Answer simply. Do not embellish. When Ezra left the stand, Silas caught his eye and nodded once. Approval. Pride. The boy had done well. Jacob Reeves was brought in next in chains guarded by Crow's deputies. His testimony was devastating, methodical, detailed. He named names, gave dates, described methods. 20 years of working for Blackwood, making problems disappear. "Catherine Miller was my first job for him," Reeves said. 19 years old, just inherited 600 acres of timberland from her father. Blackwood wanted it. She would not sell, so he had me court her, romance her, get her to marry me. Then he paid me to make her sick. Arsenic, little bit every day in her food. Took 4 months. Doc Whitmore signed the death certificate saying complications from childbirth. "What happened to the baby?" Crow asked. "There was no baby. Catherine was not pregnant. That was part of the lie." "So where did the baby in the death certificate come from?" Reeves hesitated, looking uncomfortable for the first time. "There was a baby, just not Catherine's. There was a girl worked as a maid at Blackwood's house. She got pregnant. He wanted it handled quiet. So when Catherine died, we said the baby was hers. Took the infant and left it at the church. Said the mother had died and the father was unknown." "What happened to that baby?" "Foster care, I assume. I do not know for certain." Crow let that sit for a moment, then pulled out a photograph. "Do you recognize this woman?" Reeves studied it. "That is Catherine Miller, before she got sick." "And do you notice anything distinctive about her? Any birthmarks or unusual features?" "She had a birthmark on her left shoulder, shaped like a crescent moon. Her sister Emma had the same one. They joked it made them matching." Crow turned to Judge Anderson. "Your Honor, I would like to call Emma Miller to the stand." A woman stood from the gallery, perhaps 35 years old, with Catherine's same eyes and the same determined set to her jaw. She had been silent through the entire proceedings, but now she walked forward with steady purpose. She was sworn in. "Miss Miller," Crow said, "you are Catherine Miller's younger sister." "I am." "When Catherine died, how old were you?" 16. "Did you suspect something was wrong with her death?" "I knew something was wrong. Catherine was healthy until she married Blackwood. Then she got sick, fast, and when she died they said it was from childbirth. But Catherine told me 2 weeks before she died that she was not pregnant. She was certain. She said Blackwood was making her ill somehow, but she could not prove it." "Did you tell anyone?" "I tried. I went to Deputy Ross. He said I was a grieving child imagining things. I went to the doctor. Whitmore said he had examined Catherine himself and the death was natural. Nobody would listen." "What did you do?" "I waited, I watched, I documented everything I could, and I prayed that someday someone would listen." Crow pulled out a bundle of letters. "Are these yours?" Emma looked at them and nodded. "Letters I wrote to Catherine. Letters she wrote back, including the ones where she talks about being sick, about suspecting Blackwood was poisoning her." The letters were entered into evidence, dated, signed, sealed, proof that Catherine had known what was being done to her but had been powerless to stop it. "One more question, Miss Miller," Crow said. "Do you have a birthmark on your left shoulder?" "I do. Crescent-shaped. Catherine had the same one." "Your Honor, I request permission to examine young Ezra Pike's left shoulder." Judge Anderson looked puzzled, but nodded. Bailiff, take Mr. Pike to the side room. Dr. Whitmore, you will accompany them and report what you find." 5 minutes later they returned. Whitmore's face was ashen. "Well?" Anderson asked. "Ezra Pike has a crescent-shaped birthmark on his left shoulder," Whitmore said quietly. "Identical to the one Catherine Miller had. Identical to the one Emma Miller has." The courtroom erupted again. Silas turned to look at Ezra, who sat frozen in shock staring at Emma Miller. The boy had never known his mother, had been told she died in childbirth and his father was unknown, had been raised in foster care until he ran away at 12. Now, looking at Emma, seeing the same eyes Catherine had in the photograph, seeing the recognition dawn on both their faces, the truth became undeniable. Ezra was Catherine Miller's son. The baby they had claimed died with her. The child Blackwood had discarded like garbage. Emma stood and walked to where Ezra sat. Without a word, she pulled him into her arms. The boy broke down sobbing against his aunt's shoulder. His only living family found after 14 years. Judge Anderson let them have their moment. Some things were more important than courtroom procedure. When order was finally restored, Crow said simply, "No further questions." Pierce tried to cross-examine Emma, tried to suggest the letters were forgeries or the birthmark a coincidence, but the evidence was overwhelming, and the sight of Ezra in Emma's arms was more powerful than any legal argument. The prosecution rested. Pierce stood to present his defense. The defense calls Deacon Douglas Blackwood. Against every legal instinct, Pierce had Blackwood insisted on testifying. He believed he could charm the jury, believed his position and power would protect him. He was wrong. Blackwood took the stand with absolute confidence. Straight-backed Bible in hand, the very picture of righteous indignation. "Deacon Blackwood," Pierce began, "tell the jury about your marriage to Grace Thornton." "It was an act of Christian charity," Blackwood said, his voice smooth and practiced. "She was destitute, alone, carrying another man's child. I offered her my name and my protection, asked nothing in return except that she honor her vows." "And did she honor those vows?" "No, she ran away, breaking her sacred promises, breaking the law." Pierce continued building his narrative, but it was clear even he knew it was futile. The evidence against Blackwood was mountainous. Then Crow stood for cross-examination. "Mr. Blackwood," Crow began quietly, "you say you married Grace Thornton out of charity." "Yes." "How much land did Grace inherit from her benefactor in Baltimore?" Blackwood hesitated. "I do not recall." "Let me refresh your memory. 500 acres, prime timber land, bordering your existing holdings." "That may be." "And 2 weeks after you married her, you filed paperwork to transfer that land into your name." "Standard practice. Husbands manage their wives' property." "Standard," Crow repeated. "Like it was standard when you married Catherine Miller, who inherited 600 acres and filed transfer papers 3 weeks after the wedding. That was different." "How?" "Catherine was my wife. I loved her." "Did you love her when you were slowly poisoning her to death?" "Objection," Pierce shouted. "Assumes facts not in evidence." "Your Honor," Crow said calmly, "we have testimony from Jacob Reeves, medical records from Dr. Whitmore, and letters from Catherine herself saying she believed she was being poisoned. The facts are very much in evidence." "Overruled," Anderson said. "Answer the question, Mr. Blackwood." "I did not poison anyone," Blackwood said, but his voice was losing its confidence. Crow pulled out Ross's journal. "This belonged to Deputy Clayton Ross. Do you recognize it?" "No." "Strange. He mentions you quite frequently. Let me read an entry dated July 3rd. Blackwood jokes about Catherine Miller. Says problem-solving is easier with arsenic than lawyers. He was drunk. Probably does not remember saying it, but I wrote it down." "That is a lie. Ross hated me." "Did he? Or did he hate what you made him become?" Crow flipped pages. August 10th. "Blackwood demands I arrest Brennan on false charges if he interferes with Thornton's situation. Offered $500. I refused. He threatened to expose my gambling debts. I am trapped." Blackwood's jaw clenched. Ross was corrupt. Anything he wrote is suspect. "Was Dr. Whitmore corrupt when you paid him to delay treating Sarah Brennan?" "I never did that." "Was Martha Cole corrupt when you let her die so you could foreclose on her husband's farm?" "These are lies." "Was Ezra Pike's father corrupt when he asked for safer working conditions and died 3 days later in an accident?" "That was an accident." Crow's voice grew harder. "Was Catherine Miller corrupt? Was Sarah Brennan? Was Grace Thornton? Or were they just in your way?" Blackwood stood up, his face red with rage. "You do not understand. This town exists because of me. I built it. I created jobs. I kept families fed. By murdering their wives, their daughters. By doing what needed to be done." Blackwood was shouting now, all pretense of control gone. "These people are nothing without me. I own this town, the land, the businesses, half of you through debt." "Mr. Blackwood," Judge Anderson said sharply, "sit down." But Blackwood was beyond listening. 20 years of power, of getting away with everything, of believing himself untouchable, all came crashing down at once. "I decide who succeeds," he roared. "Who fails, who lives, who dies. That is the way it works. That is the way it has always worked. Power protects power, and I have more power than any of you." Pierce was pulling at Blackwood's arm, trying to get him to sit, to stop talking. But Blackwood shoved him away. "You think this changes anything?" Blackwood turned to the jury, to the gallery. "My lawyers will appeal. My money will buy judges. I always win. I always win, because that is what power means. The ability to shape the world to your will. The ability to make people like you." He pointed at Grace. "Understand your place." Guards moved forward to restrain him, but Blackwood kept talking, kept revealing himself. She needed to be taught. They all needed to be taught. Women workers, anyone who thinks they can challenge their betters. That is what the rope was for. That is what the demonstration was for, to show everyone that even a bride of Christ is not beyond my reach, that no one is safe if they defy me. The mask was completely off now, the monster fully visible, and every word was being taken down by the court stenographer. Finally, the guards got Blackwood secured, forcing him back into his chair. Pierce looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. Judge Anderson's gavel came down like thunder. "This court will take a 30-minute recess. Mr. Blackwood, you will compose yourself or you will be gagged. Do I make myself clear?" Blackwood glared at her but said nothing. During the recess, Crow turned to Silas. "That was the defense. That was a man who has never been told no," Silas said, "who has never had to face consequences. It broke him." Grace spoke quietly. "He believed it, you know. That he had the right. That power gave him permission." "That is what makes men like him so dangerous," Silas replied. "They do not see themselves as evil. They see themselves as necessary." When court resumed, Crow called his final witness. The prosecution calls Grace Thornton. Grace stood slowly, one hand on her swollen belly. She walked to the witness stand with measured dignity, and when she placed her hand on the Bible to swear the oath, her voice was clear and steady. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" "I do." Crow approached her gently. "Miss Thornton, please tell the jury how you came to Hollow Creek." Grace took a breath and began. Her voice was quiet at first, but it grew stronger as she spoke. She told them about her life as a nun in Baltimore. 7 years of service, of helping the poor, of devotion to God and community. She told them about the mission sending her to Appalachia to help isolated families. Then she told them about Victor Gaines. He came to our mission in June of last year, a traveling preacher, they said. He seemed kind, holy. The Mother Superior invited him to dinner. I served the meal. What happened after dinner? He asked if I would help him prepare for the next day's revival service. I thought nothing of it. He was a man of God, or so I believed. Her voice caught, but she pushed through. He gave me wine, said it was communion wine, blessed and pure. I remember feeling dizzy, trying to stand, then nothing until I woke up. Where did you wake up? In the church basement. alone. My habit was torn. I was bleeding. I knew what had been done to me. Several women in the gallery were crying. Men looked away uncomfortable with the rawness of her testimony. What did you do? I told the Mother Superior. I thought she would help me, thought the church would protect me. Grace's laugh was bitter. I was wrong. She said I must have been willing, that nuns do not get raped, they seduce, that I had brought shame on the order. When did you discover you were pregnant? 6 weeks later. I tried to hide it, prayed it would go away somehow, but bodies do not lie. What did the convent do? They gave me a choice, marry or be excommunicated, cast out with nothing. No references, no money, no support. They said I had to atone for my sin. And Douglas Blackwood volunteered to marry you. Yes. The Mother Superior said he was a respected deacon, a charitable man, that I should be grateful anyone would take a fallen woman. Did you want to marry him? No, but I had no choice. It was marry him or die in the streets. Grace described the wedding, how she had cried through the entire ceremony, how no one asked if she was willing, how Blackwood had smiled the whole time, pleased with his acquisition. Tell us about your wedding night. Grace's hands tightened on the arms of the chair. He told me the truth, that I was not his wife. I was his lesson, his demonstration of power. He said breaking even a bride of Christ would show everyone in Hollow Creek that he was untouchable, that he owned them all, body and soul. She described 3 weeks of captivity, locked in a room, minimal food, no contact with the outside world, Blackwood visiting daily to remind her of her place. He would read Bible verses about obedience, Grace said, about wives submitting to husbands, about Eve's sin. He said I was the serpent, the temptress, that I deserved everything that was happening. And then came the rope. Yes, one morning he came in calm, too calm. He had new rope. He tied me himself, carefully, methodically, like he had done it before. Her voice broke. He said people would find me eventually, that my humiliation would teach other women not to challenge him, that my suffering would be a sermon more powerful than any words. How long were you tied there? I do not know. The sun rose and set at least twice, maybe 3 times. I lost track. I had water at first, but it ran out. I thought I would die there, thought my baby would die, and I prayed, not to be rescued, just for it to end quick. What happened when Silas Brennan found you? For the first time Grace smiled, small and sad, but genuine. He asked one question. Can you walk? Not who I was, not what I had done to deserve this, just could I walk? First time in months someone treated me like a person, like I mattered. She looked at Silas, and he met her gaze steadily. He cut me loose, gave me water, his coat, brought me to his home and asked for nothing, just helped. Her voice strengthened. That is when I learned something important. Power is not just about strength, it is about choice. Blackwood chose to use his power to hurt. Silas chose to use his to help. That difference is everything. Crow let that sit for a moment. Then he asked his final question. Grace, why are you testifying today? What do you want this jury to understand? Grace turned to face the 12 men and women who held her fate in their hands. I want you to understand that I am not asking for pity. I am asking you to see me, to see all of us. Catherine, Sarah, Martha, the women who came before, the women who will come after if you do nothing. Her voice rang clear through the courtroom. I am not a cautionary tale. I am a survivor. I am not ashamed. Shame belongs to the men who did this, and I am not powerless. Not anymore. Because you have the power to say that in America justice exists even for people like me, even for women, even for the powerless. She placed her hand on her belly. My baby will be born soon. I want her to grow up in a world where women are people, where power has limits, where truth matters more than money. You can give her that world. You can give all of us that world by saying no to Douglas Blackwood, by saying no to men like him, by saying enough. Grace's words hung in the air like a benediction. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then a woman in the gallery stood, silent, just standing. Another woman rose, then another. Within seconds, 15 women were on their feet. The women from Ruth's circle, women who had suffered in silence, women who had lost daughters, sisters, mothers to men like Blackwood. Then women from the jury stood. Ruth Palmer first, then 2 others, then more women throughout the courtroom. 40, 50, standing in silent witness. Some of the men stood too. Henry the blacksmith, Ezra, even a few who had initially supported Blackwood. Judge Anderson did not bang her gavel, did not demand order. She understood that this moment transcended her courtroom. This was something bigger, something that had been building for generations and was finally finding voice. When people finally sat down, Pierce had no questions. What could he ask that would matter after that? The prosecution rested. Pierce tried to present more defense witnesses, but his heart was not in it. The case was over. Everyone knew it. Judge Anderson called for closing arguments. They were brief. Pierce argued technicalities. Crow argued justice. Then the jury retired to deliberate. They were gone 45 minutes. When they returned, every face was serious. Ruth Palmer stood as forewoman. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Anderson asked. "We have your honor." "In the matter of Silas Brennan charged with abduction and interference, we find Silas Brennan not guilty. He acted to save a life in immediate danger." Applause broke out. Anderson allowed it briefly. "In the matter of Douglas Blackwood charged with unlawful imprisonment, assault, conspiracy murder, and conspiracy to commit murder." Ruth's voice was strong and clear. "We find Douglas Blackwood guilty on all charges: murder of Catherine Miller, conspiracy to commit murder in the deaths of Sarah Brennan, Martha Cole, and others, unlawful imprisonment and torture of Grace Thornton, conspiracy, fraud, bribery, and racketeering." The courtroom erupted in noise, some celebrating, some in shock, some in anger. "What is the jury's recommendation for sentencing?" Anderson asked. "We recommend hanging for Douglas Blackwood. We recommend his properties be seized and sold with proceeds going to his victims' families. And we recommend a full investigation into the Land Acquisition Society and all its members." Anderson nodded. "So ordered. Mr. Blackwood, you are hereby sentenced to death by hanging sentence to be carried out in 30 days pending any appeals. Bailiff, take him into custody." Guards moved forward. Blackwood stood, his face a mask of hatred. He looked at Grace. "This is not over. I have money, lawyers. I will be free in months." Grace stood too, one hand on her belly. "No, you will not, because people know now, and they are not afraid anymore. There will always be men like me, and there will always be people like them." Grace gestured to Silas, to Crow, to Ruth, to Ezra, to all the people who had stood up. "We have each other. That is all the victory we need." As guards led Blackwood away, he turned back one last time. "Your land," he said to Silas, "will never be worth what I would have paid." Silas met his gaze without flinching. "Good. Means it stays mine." Outside the courthouse, people were celebrating and arguing in equal measure. The verdict had split the town, but the split was along clear lines now: justice or power, truth or money. Grace stood on the courthouse steps, breathing in the free air when she felt it. A contraction, sharp and undeniable. "Silas," she said quietly. He was beside her in an instant. "What is wrong?" "The baby. It is coming." Her water broke right there on the steps, in full view of half of Hollow Creek. Ruth appeared from somewhere, taking charge immediately. "We need to get her to Dr. Whitmore's office. It is closest." They half-carried Grace the 2 blocks to Whitmore's office. The old doctor, sober for once, prepared the examination room with shaking but competent hands. "How far apart are the contractions?" he asked. 5 minutes. Grace gasped. "This is going to be fast. Everyone out except Ruth and Mrs. Collins." Silas found himself outside with Crow and Ezra, pacing like an expectant father, which in a way he supposed he was. The labor lasted 14 hours. Short for a first baby, Ruth said later, but it felt eternal to everyone waiting. Silas sat on the steps outside watching the sun set and rise again, thinking about Sarah, about the baby he had never met, about the second chance he had been given. Dawn was breaking over the mountains when they heard it, a baby's cry, strong and healthy and alive. Ruth emerged tired but smiling. Girl, healthy, mother exhausted but well. Silas stood slowly, his body stiff from sitting all night. "Can I see them?" "She asked for you." He entered the room quietly. Grace lay in the bed, pale and exhausted, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in clean cloth. When she looked up at him, her eyes were wet with tears. "Her name is Sarah," Grace said. "After your wife. After the woman whose husband showed me that goodness still exists in this world." Silas felt his throat close. 3 years of grief and guilt and loneliness crashed over him all at once. He had not cried since Sarah died, had not let himself. But looking at this baby, at this new life, brought into the world against all odds, he could not hold it back. Tears streamed down his weathered face as Grace placed the baby in his arms. She was so small, so perfect. Her tiny hand gripped his finger with surprising strength, and she opened her eyes, blue like all newborns, but alert and focused. "Hello, little Sarah," he whispered. "Welcome to the world. It is a harsh place, but some of us fight to make it better. And you are going to help us." Grace smiled. "Will you stay? Help me raise her? Not as anything romantic, just as family." Silas looked at this woman who had survived so much, at the baby named after his wife, at the second chance he had been given to do right by someone. "I would be honored," he said. The door opened and Ezra peered in, shy and uncertain. "Can I see?" "Come," Silas said. The boy approached carefully, staring at the baby with wonder. "She is so tiny." "You were that small once," Silas said. "Hard to believe, I know." "What will you teach her?" Ezra asked. "When she is older," Silas thought about that. "Everything. Tracking, hunting, how to survive in these mountains, how to read the weather and the animals and the land. A girl can learn all that. A girl can learn anything she is willing to be taught. The world is changing, Ezra. We change with it." They sat together, this makeshift family. A mountain man, a former nun, a baby, and a boy who had just discovered he had an aunt, bound not by blood or law, but by something stronger: survival, choice, love. 3 months passed. December came to the mountains with early snow and crystalline mornings. The cabin had been expanded, a new room built for Grace and baby Sarah. Ezra had moved in, learning his trade from Silas while helping care for the household. Grace taught reading 3 days a week at the new school converted from Blackwood's old church. The women's circle met openly now, no longer secret. Dr. Whitmore was sober, serving poor patients without charge, trying to earn back some measure of redemption. Blackwood's execution had been carried out in November. He had gone to the gallows, still insisting he had done nothing wrong. His last words were about property rights and the natural order of things. Nobody mourned him. The Land Acquisition Society investigation was ongoing. 3 members had been arrested. 7 had fled. The network was crumbling but slowly. These things took time. It was a cold December afternoon when Sheriff Crow rode up to the cabin, letter in hand. "From Weston," he said, 50 miles south. Silas read the letter carefully. A woman named Elizabeth Parker. Her husband beat her. The local sheriff was his cousin. No one would help. She had heard about Hollow Creek, about what they had done. Could they help her too? Silas looked at Grace, who was nursing baby Sarah by the fire. "If you go, I am coming too," she said. "The baby is only 3 months old. Then we bring her, or Ruth watches her. But I do not sit here safe while another woman suffers." Ezra stood from where he had been cleaning his rifle. "I will come too. You need help." Crow smiled. "If we do this, it becomes our work. Going where the law will not. Helping people nobody else will help." Silas looked at the letter again. at Elizabeth Parker's desperate handwriting, at the plea for help from someone who had nowhere else to turn. He thought about Sarah, about Catherine, about all the women who had died because no one helped. "Then let it be our work," he said. "The world needs it." "World needs a lot of things," Crow said. "Might as well start somewhere." They spent 3 days preparing, gathering evidence, gathering materials, making plans, arranging care for baby Sarah with Ruth. On the morning they left, Silas stood at Sarah's grave one last time. The first Sarah, his wife. "I think you would approve of what I am doing," he said to the silent stone, "using my remaining years to help others, to stop men like the one who killed you. It does not bring you back, nothing can, but it means something." He laid wildflowers on her grave and walked away. The journey was beginning, but this story was ending. The old cabin on the mountain, the autumn afternoon in 1914, Silas Brennan at 75 finishing his tale for his granddaughter Emma. "And Elizabeth Parker?" Emma asked, leaning forward. "We saved her," Silas said. "Got her to safety. Her husband tried to stop us, tried to claim legal rights. But we had learned from Hollow Creek. We documented everything, built a case. He went to prison. And after Elizabeth, 46 more. Over 20 years. Women from 5 states. Some we saved. Some we could not reach in time. But we tried. Every single time we tried." Emma was crying softly. "What happened to Blackwood's network? Took 10 years to dismantle completely. But we did it. Crow and I. With help from others. Ruth, Ezra when he was old enough. Even young Sarah once she grew up. She is in Washington now, working with the suffrage movement, fighting in the Capitol what her mother fought here in the mountains. And Grace. Lived here until 1905, taught hundreds of children, died peacefully in her sleep. Sarah was 15, old enough to remember her, old enough to carry on her work. Emma wiped her eyes. "Where is Sarah now? Your wife's rifle is on the wall, but I see another one too." Silas gestured to a different rifle. "That one belonged to Ezra. He is Sheriff Ezra Pike now. Took over when Crow retired. Best lawman in 3 counties. The boy I taught to track is now teaching others. And you kept all the records, all the evidence." Silas went to an old chest and pulled out journals. Stacks of them. 20 years of documentation. Cases, testimonies, evidence. All of it. I kept everything, because I learned from Ruth Palmer. Always document, always preserve the truth. He handed the journals to Emma. "You said you need stories, real stories, about men who stood up, about women who survived. Here, use them. Tell the stories. Show people the history." Emma took the journals reverently, holding them like sacred texts. "Thank you, Grandfather. Will you speak at our suffrage rally? Tell your story." Silas shook his head. "I am too old. My voice is not strong anymore. But you have my journals. You have the truth. That is more powerful than any speech I could give." Emma stood to leave journals carefully packed. She hugged her grandfather, feeling how frail he had become, how much time had taken from him. "One more question," she said. "Do you regret it? The choices you made, almost dying multiple times, giving up a peaceful life?" Silas was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the mountains that had been his home for over 50 years. "I regret not saving Sarah sooner," he said finally. "Not learning about Blackwood earlier, not stopping him before he killed so many others. Those regrets will follow me to my grave. But regret saving Grace? Regret the life I built after Sarah died? Never." His eyes met Emma's. "You asked what I found in those years. I found purpose. I found family. I found a reason to keep living when I thought I had none. What should people learn from all this? What is the lesson?" Silas considered carefully. 2 lessons. First, power unchecked becomes tyranny. Silence enables evil. Speaking up matters. Always. And second, you cannot save everyone. I learned that the hard way. But if you save one person, you have changed the world. For them. And sometimes that is enough. Sometimes that is everything." Emma nodded, understanding settling over her like a cloak. "I will tell your story well, grandfather. I promise." "Just tell it true," Silas said. "Truth is all that matters in the end." He watched her ride away, the journals secured in her saddlebags, watched until she disappeared around the bend in the trail. Then he sat back in his chair and picked up his knife and his piece of wood. Carving. Like he had been when she arrived. Like he would continue doing until his hands could no longer hold the blade. The mountains stood eternal around him. The sun dropped toward the western peaks. Smoke rose from chimneys in distant hollows. Silas Brennan had lived a long life, had seen terrible things and done hard things and lost much and gained more, had fought against power and cruelty and the kind of evil that wore respectable faces, had won some battles and lost others. But he had fought. That was the important thing. Had stood up when it mattered, had helped when help was needed. Some men leave wealth, some leave monuments. Silas left stories, stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, stories of justice hard-won and carefully protected. That would have to be enough. That was everything. The sun set over the Appalachian Mountains, painting the sky orange and gold. In the cabin an old man carved wood and remembered his wives, both Sarah, and the years of partnership with Grace, remembered the children he had helped raise, remembered the women saved and the women lost, remembered that even in the darkest times, even when power seemed invincible, ordinary people could stand against it, could say no, could fight back. That legacy would outlive him, would outlive them all, passed from generation to generation in stories and actions and the quiet courage of people who chose right over easy. Silas Brennan set down his knife and closed his eyes, not to sleep, just to rest, just to remember. The mountains kept their watch, as they always had, as they always would. And somewhere in Washington, D.C., Sarah Brennan Thornton was preparing a speech about women's suffrage, using her mother's story, using her namesake's memory, fighting the fight that had started in these mountains 25 years before. The work continued, the legacy lived on, and that was enough.